Hello, hello, hello. How are you? I'm Stephanie Weisman, Artistic Director and founder of the Marsh and MarshStream, bringing you tonight's solo performer spotlight. Melissa Bangs playing Monopoly with God. Well, please consider supporting the MarshStream and its artists with a tax-deductible donation to the tip jar or join our membership program. Tonight's tips are matched. And if you can, please subscribe to the Marsh's YouTube channel and be notified when all our shows go live. You can also see our archive shows at themarsh.org. And now I'd like to welcome Melissa Bangs playing Monopoly with God.
So here we are, Rattlestick Theater, New York City, sitting backstage in this beautiful green room. When I ordered my records from the psych ward, which were about this thick, about a year out of the psych ward, somewhere around page 87, there was a note that said, "Patient says she'll do comedy on this experience." And I laughed out loud when I read it. And I thought, I wonder if they changed my meds after they heard me say that. But yeah, I even knew psychotic that that this would be healing, not only for me, but for a lot of other people. I am telling a story that is funny and sad and bewildering and uplifting and everything in between. Every time I tell my story, I think tonight is the 43rd performance. Every time I feel like I just extrude my guts on stage, and I feel emptied in a way. At the end of the show, I feel empty, and after all the conversations post-show, I feel full again, and I know that I'm meant to keep telling this story.
Did you know that only 10 to 15% of births begin with a spontaneous breaking of the waters? I learned that in birth class, and I thought, phew, no irrigating the aisles of Target or the grocery store for this mama. 10 to 15%. That's so small. Well, this is a story about slim chances. It's a story about things they don't teach you in birth class. Again and again, I found myself among this pool of women that I'd never met, navigating waters I'd never heard stories about. I was about 10 months pregnant, waddling along on the way to the local brewery, like any good expectant mama would, when suddenly, kadoosh! It was as if a large aquarium just exploded on the sidewalk. The shit splashed my face. It even had that mossy green stuff like an aquarium. Meconium, they call it. And I thought, this did not just happen. This is so dramatic. This is the kind of thing that happens to other people. I had imagined such a serene birth. I wouldn't say I read a lot in preparing for childbirth, but I did read handfuls of birth stories and watched dozens of home births on YouTube. I really loved those birth pool earth mamas. You know the ones that seem to like ohm their babies into the world like a yogi? Like, like at the height of fucking childbirth. I was like, that's gonna be me. Whenever I saw a video of one of the high drama mamas, you know, yelling and screaming, I was like, ladies, isn't that a little over the top? Just like your one moment in the spotlight, you know. Come on. I was curious about one particular brand of over-the-top childbirth. Has anyone heard of orgasmic birth? I saw the documentary. That shit's pretty unreal. Women having the orgasms of their lives while pushing babies the size of watermelons through the birth canal. I really had to check myself. I was like, self, okay, so we're really resonating with the graceful, subtle stuff, and you're not really feeling the high drama, but do you really want to shut yourself off from the possibility of the orgasm of your life? There's like one answer to that question, right? I was like, okay, I'm open. I'm open. For some reason, in all these stories, there was one particular detail that I really grabbed onto. I loved it when Mama did not tear. 0 stitches. So I took notes on the midwife massage of the perineum and the way they'd slow it all down as the head made its way through the birth canal, just giving everything time to like stretch out. I set a goal, a vision, 0 stitches. So I share my plan with my midwife, Sandano, and she says, yeah, Mel, I hate to walk on your dreams, but this shit's gonna get so intense, you're really not gonna notice when you're ripping and tearing down there. She said, if you're like most mamas, when it gets to that point of the birth, you're just gonna want that baby the fuck out of you. I said, okay, so if I tear, but can we at least try? I'm really goal-oriented. I need something I can focus on. Can you just like rub my perineum a little bit? Which for those that need a translation, and keep in mind, I did tour the show all over Montana, and so I would translate for the cowboys. That would be, could you just rub my taint a little bit? Then I awkwardly tell Sandano, I said, it says here in this book that you lent us, chapter 7, that in order to avoid severe tearing, that you and your partner might experiment for several weeks leading up to the birth with putting your partner's entire hand up there. And she gives me this look like, what are you, some kind of pervert? Look, lady, you're giving birth to a baby. We're not filming a porno here. And I said, hey, you lent us this book, and chapter 7 stipulates fisting and nipple stimulation to avoid severe tearing. And she adjusted her look only slightly, and she said, yeah, I would avoid experimenting with that if you don't want to go into early labor. No one really tells you in birth class, there's a lot of sexual stuff wrapped up in birth and breastfeeding. Sandano said it plainly. She said, birth is very sexual. I had no idea what she was talking about, and it did not make me feel comfortable. If you have issues with your body or sex, that shit might come up. I hadn't really thought about the fact that my baby was gonna come into the world via my sex organs and then feed on parts of me that I'd only really ever used as sex toys or fashion accessories. As women, we have to come to terms with the fact that nipple stimulation can lead to clitoral stimulation. We should talk about this shit. You know, just like maybe one time before you feed your baby, just once. Just talk about it. My biggest aha moment in all these stories was when I realized that very few of these women had any clue how to birth a baby. But their bodies seemed to have this instinct and knowing, and I thought, maybe if I could just like lean in and not brace myself, you know, stay hydrated, like maybe she'd pull it off, you know, dare to dream, right? So there I was, September 5th, 2012, leaning in. As the contractions kicked in, I repeated mantras in my mind like, I am butter. I am elastic. My vagina is huge. Eric was my pit crew captain. He'd shove this straw in my mouth, and with every contraction, I'd take this big swig of this hippy-dippy birth aid, one of Sandano's hot tips for endurance. For about 4 or 5 hours during the contractions, we'd get in this position called the birth dance. I don't know if you're familiar with it. We've got some nods in the audience. I would put my hands around his neck and just let all of my weight hang off him, like as if the bottom half of me were just melting. Now, you might have noticed I'm not really what you would call a wisp of a woman. Eric says I'm substantial. I like that. He said, babe, you're the most substantial woman I've ever dated. It's like, thanks. Let's just say 4 or 5 hours of this hanging off your neck. It was hard to tell who'd given birth when it was all said and done. In addition to hydrating and holding, Eric was my cheerleader. When shit got real, he'd say things like, you're amazing. You've got this. Thank you for giving our baby such a gentle entry into the world. I love that you love it, that feeling. You laugh at that part. I know, because you heard his voice. If you met him, you would know. He's a bit of a comedian. When he's uncomfortable or things go wrong in our life, he goes straight to comedy. I love this about him. I go with him. Bad news from the tax man, a family crisis here and there. We go straight to joking. But I warned him. I said, babe, if you joke when I'm in more pain than I've ever been in my entire life, I cannot promise that I will not throat punch you. So there he is. You're amazing. You've got this. His gentle words were like threads back into my body where I'm on all fours, I'm dripping in sweat, and I'm shaking profusely. You know, birth hormones are a godsend. I'm in more pain than I've ever been in my entire life, and I'm out of my body. I'm flying higher than a kite, and I could see this giant blazing fire. And with each contraction, I felt like I'd put a toe in the fire, I'd take it out. I'd try a leg, I'd take it out. Now remind me once again, how many of you have never made another human being with your body? Okay, this part's for you, Birth Class 101. Childbirth is nothing like dangling your toe gently over a flame. I think a more accurate description might be, imagine blowtorching your insides through your asshole. And it is surprising, right, that it is through your asshole. I mean, I was in more pain I'd ever been in, and I still had the thought of, well, that's curious, it's my asshole. You're welcome. And I'm sorry. Where was I? Oh, right, dangling. So, at some point I realized, oh no, if I'm ever gonna bring this baby into the world, I think I'm gonna have to stand in the heart of that fire for a good long time and walk through to the other side. This took several contractions to work up to, and I do mean several. I was like, you're amazing. You've got this. Nope, not that one. Catch you next time. Only way out is through. And I come back into my body and I think, what the fuck was that? And I look at Eric and he's stunned. And later I find out it takes everything in him at this moment not to bust up hysterically laughing. And he's looking at me and I think, oh, it was me. I didn't sound anything like those birth pool earth mamas. I was going back to the primordial ancestors of the yellers and screamers. Fancy yourself subtle? Maybe not so much. Next thing you know, little Adelaide comes into the world wide-eyed and present, and the love that flooded my being in that moment was beyond words. I couldn't have imagined who'd she become. She's 5.5 now. That she'd be brave and ballsy, curious and shy. I hadn't an inkling of her brilliant comedic timing, or the way my heart would explode again and again as she learned to say or said things to me around 2.5, like, I love you, Mama. We best friends. Love you, best friend. All I knew from moment one is that I would give anything and everything to keep her safe and make sure that she knew she was loved. My love coma was interrupted by a small commotion near the family jewels. There was the ceremonial cutting of the cord and Sandano's understated delivery of the fact that I didn't need any stitches. I know, wow, right? That's what I thought. I was like, wow, okay. So I'm fucking exhausted, and I just passed a blood clot the size of a grapefruit, but my vagina is huge. Like they can be. And then if you're lucky, sometime later, they're not so much. If you're lucky. I get stuck on my vagina's huge bit sometimes. I get lost in that. I could not have imagined what came next. I mean, I know that sleep deprivation is an international form of torture. Anyone sleep deprived long enough will in fact lose their mind. I just had no way of knowing that 1 month without any deep sleep would be my enough. It all started innocently. Eric had time off, and we soaked up every minute with this new little being. Family and friends surrounded us, reassuring us that she looked nothing like an alien. Reassuring Eric that she looks something like him. Breastfeeding went off without a hitch despite the nipple stimulation. She would feed every 1.5 hours, 24 hours a day. And Eric would, from time to time, he'd change a nighttime diaper and rock her back to sleep. Can I have a minute here with 17-year-old Adelaide? I'm just imagining that at some point she's gonna see a video of this on like her generation's equivalent of YouTube. And I have some things to say to her. Ada baby, you have always been an amazing eater and sleeper. I mean, you can really mow the lawn. You make Mama so proud. Do you remember as early as 1, you would stand in the garden and eat kale for like 10 or 15 minutes? I hope you're still eating kale, love bug. And sleep? Those north side trains and Papa's walrus snore were like lullabies to you. Sure, you get up and feed every 1.5 hours, but then you just pass the fuck out. Ada baby, you're 17. I'm assuming you can handle some F-bombs from your mama. I just want you to know, love, in every ounce of your being, that none of this was your fault. That girl could dream feed her way through the night. Do you know what that is? That is eating while sleeping. Babies, they should patent that shit. That's like my dream. Now me, I was a first-time mama. I was hypervigilant. This is normal. Hormones kick in your mama bear brain to stimulate feeding, bonding, attachment. I would later find out, and so will you, how my hormonal picture catapulted me far out of the realm of normal. Adelaide would be sound asleep, kicking, gurgling, jerking. With every sound or movement, I felt as if I had to investigate to make sure she was still breathing. I did that so much in that first month that at some point, I failed to get any sleep. At some point, I couldn't fall asleep at all. This left me exhausted, dreamy, weepy, elated. Sandano said, she said, every mama experiences some form of postpartum something. Too much has changed not to rock you a little bit. She said the tears would likely come, the flip-flopping emotions, the sense of love and loss. I'd sit for hours holding her, smelling her, feeding her, and I'd cry several times every day. The change and the emotions, they were just so big. I just had to let some of them out. And then one day, I was overcome with this fear, this visceral fear that Adelaide or Eric or I might die at any minute. Somehow this experience of bringing new life into the world had cracked me wide open to the vulnerability of it all, to the fact that not a one of us is guaranteed another 5 minutes on this planet. It was suddenly too much to bear. How would I keep her safe? How would I keep her safe from choking hazards, sharp things, germs on the shopping cart? How would I keep her safe from her own emotions or mine? How would I keep her safe from unclean drinking water, poison in our food, the pain of the polar bear going extinct? Mean kids, douchebags, pedophiles. I was fading fast, far beyond the normal levels of vigilance. It became harder and harder to navigate my days. I'd forget to eat and drink water. I couldn't figure out how or when to shower. I felt as if it was my job to make sure that she never cried, so I wouldn't put her down at all. Now, some people who want to connect with the divine might smoke peyote and walk into the desert with a medicine man. Others might take a vow of silence and meditate or pray on a mountaintop for a good long time. Me, I just gave birth at 40 when my hormones were completely whacked and didn't sleep for a month, and bam, I could see God in everything. I felt these profound waves of forgiveness and compassion. I felt like I was this open channel to ancient truths. One day I said to Eric, baby, did you know that in every given moment, there's only ever one choice? Fear, love, baby. Fear or love. I felt as if the world had begun to vibrate at a higher and higher frequency, and those of us that chose love, well, we were going to become light. Light was compassion, it was forgiveness, it was peace. I was pretty excited about it. I need to make sure that Adelaide and Eric and our 3 kiddies were coming with me. So I decided to demonstrate to Eric that the physical world was dissolving. Among other wild acts, I did a little piece of naked performance art. You might think this happened often in our marriage, me standing up here talking about my huge vagina and such, but this was in fact the only piece of naked performance art in our marriage thus far. While naked, and I will say this made complete sense at the time, it was brilliant, in fact. I drank the cat water, which tasted surprisingly like human water. I peed in the baby swing, and then I smashed a glass on the floor and I stepped all over it with my bare feet. Somehow my message of baby, it's all love, was kind of lost in translation. Next thing you know, I wake up in lockdown at this loony bin with mastitis and a couple of rock-hard triple Ds. No one really mentions in birth class, you might go to the loony bin. There was talk of the baby blues. They touched a little bit on postpartum depression, not much, but a little bit. But no one had mentioned that my brain might just go on sabbatical despite her tenured post. Turns out a reported 15 to 20% of moms experience a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder. This ranges from depression, anxiety, PTSD, panic, bipolar, OCD, psychosis, and 5% go to the psych ward. And leaders in the field will tell you that we know that those numbers that experience the perinatal mood or anxiety disorders are likely much higher, given that stigma looms so large that many, many moms never reach out and get help and are simply enduring inside. So there I am in a baby blue room with 3 cameras on the ceiling, and I'm just aching to hold Adelaide, to feed her, to smell her. I felt as if my arms had been ripped from my body and I just might bleed out. Some days I felt as if I was literally searching for the ground with my tears, just sending out these massive search parties, this sobbing, and trouble was, this state was bottomless. Nothing known or familiar, not for weeks. And it was in the state of the unknown, in total free fall, that these loving voices arrived. They'd say things to me like, there is no right or wrong, love. It is all intention. The past is done. You are forgiven. There is only now. And you are love. They'd say, breathe, Milla. Breathe. And when I could listen to them, and when I remembered to breathe, I was gifted these moments in lockdown at the loony bin. They were kind of extraordinary. I'll share a few. I remember that somehow everyone's primary physical flaw was a sign they too were God. So everyone who came into my room, I'd be like, where's her flaw? Where's his flaw? Where's her flaw? There was a nurse with a wandering eye. There was one with scars on her neck. And another one whose eyes were permanently wide open, like she was always surprised. And I thought, yep, divine, divine, divine. I had to laugh out loud when I realized that the 2 people who had to truly hear me in order for me ever to go home, my psychiatrist and my social worker, both fucking wore hearing aids. I was like, you funny. One day, I was sitting in my room by myself and looking out the north-facing picture window, and I was laughing at something that I can't remember now, and this gust of wind came up, and it picked these vibrant yellow leaves from the tree, and it catapulted them in this shape and rhythm that seemed to mimic my laugh. Well, this made me laugh. And it happened again. Perfect repetition. So, you know, the wind, the leaves, and I, we just hung out for a while together, just chuckling. One day, I played Monopoly with God. There was this male nurse and these 4 psych patients and me, and he was so funny and smart and kind, and he kept changing the rules so like every one of us would make more money on every turn. And you wouldn't lose your property, you would always advance, you wouldn't go to jail. And I thought, oh, he's definitely the manifestation of God in the room tonight. No doubt about that. Well, God and I tied, but not before he agreed to clean up the shanty towns on Baltic and Mediterranean. And I thought, holy shit, how cool is this? Here I am in lockdown, I've lost my mind, and God and I are eradicating poverty. At some point, I realized that they kept evading my questions about when I might go home. And I thought, oh, they're planning a surprise going away party for me, and they can't tell me. Well, I didn't want to ruin the surprise, but I did want to make sure that every one of my companions on the highly medicated lockdown side of the ward was invited. This is the side devoid of niceties like classes, a lounge, snack fridge, and in most cases, surprise parties. I broke the rule several times about not going into other patients' rooms in order to invite every one of Nancy's personalities. I even got to invite the dark spewing food throwing Nancy because, I mean, who knew? People heal. Maybe that's what dark spewing food throwing Nancy needed. A little surprise, a little party. Nancy's was not the only room I entered illegally. Earl and I got off to a rough start. Every time I'd pass his room on the way to the bathroom, he'd say, "Tell her to shut up. Tell her to shut up. I'd see these images in my mind's eye of Earl's past hurts, his regrets, and I felt compelled to tell him telepathically from my hospital bed, Earl, you are forgiven. There's only now, man. Your love. Tell her to shut up. Well, one day I pass Earl's room on the way to the bathroom, and he doesn't yell at me. He smiles. So I walked straight into his room, and I held his hand, and we said nothing. We just smiled at each other for a while until I was escorted out of his room. Earl and I would meet again, and we meet up again on the open side when we were both moved there, and we would share a meal and spend some time, and I learned that he had been in a wheelchair for about 8 years. He was a veteran. He carried a lot of shame. So one day I said to him with my mouth, Earl, you know, maybe your paralysis is all that regret. Like, maybe if you could forgive yourself, you'd walk again. What do you know? One day I come around the corner, here's Earl's wife standing with her mouth dropped open crying, and here's Earl, and he's walking towards us. Now, he's not walking very well, mind you, but he's walking, and he sees me, and he says, and I said, I remember one day Eric was visiting, and I had this fear that if he left, they were never going to let him back in. So I thought, what can I do? What can I do? I can't let him leave. I know. I'll play dead. So I'm laying there playing dead, and I think, oh my God, please don't stick me with a needle. I don't think I can play dead if you stick me with a needle. Well, they didn't stick me with a needle, but they did take my pulse. Turns out the plan was flawed. But you know, I have some chops, so I'm still holding on to the act. I'm not giving in that easy. I said, how do you know that's not my last beat? Right there. Last one. And as I'm holding on, really with everything I'm worth, I think, wait a minute, maybe this is a brilliant mistake. I mean, if I'm dead, at some point they'll bury me alive. But if I'm in a coma, maybe they'll let Eric hang out, you know, like bring me flowers, sit by my bed, hold my hand, tell me all those things our loved ones really only figure out how to say when we're in a coma. I never get enough coma talk from that man. Before he left that day, he said, babe, I'm pretty sure that they're going to let me back in here. But if there ever comes a day that they don't, you don't worry. I'll bust you out of here. I believed him. Again and again, as I would ask when I might go home, the answer continued to be, it's too soon to tell. I'd signed this document in a completely whacked out state, agreeing to put myself in the care of Dr. Held, the psychiatrist. If I wanted to go home before he deemed it safe, well, I could sign another document contesting his holding me, but ultimately it was up to Dr. Held. Did I go home or did I go to long-term psychiatric care? Did I stay on the lockdown side of the ward, or was I allowed to attend classes on the open side? It was up to Dr. Held whether or not my suicide score was low enough to be allowed to pass my time alone in my room with any number of items. Now, I don't have any memory of wanting to die in this experience. Sure, I stepped all over broken glass and pulled my catheter out, and I played dead, but I didn't want to die. I wanted to go home with Adelaide. I did, however, in this state, spend time thinking about the pain and desperation and creativity of people who had wanted to end it all in the psych ward, as the list of things I asked for that I was not allowed to have was pretty unreal. I'll just give you a few examples. Pens, pencils, floss, nail polish, nail clippers, shoelaces, colored pencils, paintbrushes. I thought, wow, that'd be some way to go. Just paint myself into oblivion. Dr. Held not only decided were I a threat to myself, but were I a threat to Adelaide. She'd visit at least every other day and stay for a half hour, an hour, and he would decide in those visits whether or not I was allowed to hold her. Every time I saw her, every particle of my being cried out to hold her. Being away from her was the most excruciating, unnatural thing I have ever experienced. I would have given anything to go home with her, and I do mean anything. According to my hospital record, I attempted to rebirth Adelaide 3 times. I scared the pants off the poor souls in lockdown with me. I still remember the face of this one male nurse just pleading with me not to do it again. Apparently, he'd never been to a live childbirth before. I still remember one of the 3 times. I had this idea that if I could return with every ounce of my being to the moment of her birth, maybe I'd just wake up at home with her in my arms, like press restart, right? You know, like travel through time and space on the wings of love. You see, in this state, I knew things about quantum physics, theories of relativity, and far beyond. There's no such thing as time and space, love. These are man-made constructs. Everyone you have ever loved is here now. Even if these baby blue walls encase the rest of your existence, Adelaide is here. Eric is here. In those moments, I could smell her. I felt as if someone had given me my arms back and she was in them. And I could see Eric's eyes, that loving gaze that never once in this experience made me feel as if I was crazy or as if somehow this was all my fault. And her smell and his gaze would hold me for a minute, 10, an hour, and then I'd come to and I'd think, we gotta get the fuck out of here. Do normal, Mella. Just do normal. How does one do normal when sitting in a psych ward? I had a lot of time to contemplate this. Let me paint the scene for you. You're sitting in a room by yourself. You're alone in this room for most of the 24 hours of the day, save a routine visit here and there. You're wearing purple scrubs. All the crazies are. You got on soft slippers, no shoes, so you can't hurt anyone. You're wearing your own bathrobe, which is a comfort and a luxury and a reminder of home, but it's flung open kind of sloppily. You can't have a rope. Your silverware are plastic, and your colored pencils are contraband. How do you pass your time? Now, keep in mind there are cameras on the ceiling, and the nurses in the hall are taking notes. I thought, well, if I clean or organize too much, OCD. If I laugh too easily too often, delusional. If I sleep all the time, what do you think? Depressed. If I make too much art, manic. I remember I had to hide my Cosmic Poo series. Such a shame, because really I'd like to share them with the world. I had rendered these beautiful drawings of my bowel movements. Their color, consistency, texture. I was deciphering divine messages from God through my feces. I was like, holy shit. You're kidding me. Oh, no. I mean, no, I got it. I'll write it down. I mean, you gifted me with artistic talent and a photographic memory. You got it. I'll go write it down. Okay. Cosmic poo was not the only thing I had to hide in order to get home. I remember one day Dr. Held asked me, he said, do you have a Jesus complex? I thought, wow, had he been watching me in my morning stretches? I just kept getting stuck in this position. Just felt so good. It felt so good. He asked me that question, do you have a Jesus complex? And two quick thoughts passed my brain. I thought, don't you? And then I thought, aren't we all God? And I quickly said, no. No. Dr. Held would meet with my family from time to time and update them on recent changes in behavior and meds. And it seemed somewhere around 2.5 weeks while I'd been doing well enough to attend classes with patients on the open side, I was exhibiting some inappropriate behavior. Not really of the naked performance art vein. More, I kept interrupting the class as if I were the facilitator. My dad says, great news. Dr. Held says, what? And my dad said, yeah, I mean, the only thing that might more clearly indicate that Mel's back is if she starts telling you how to do your job. What can I say? I'm opinionated. I lack filters. I'm working on it. You know, you own it, you work on it, you gotta love yourself in the meantime. I already had told him how to do his job. For many days in a row, as I struggled with the disjointed perceptions of the state and the many psychotropic drugs, I looked to those 10 to 15 minutes a day as an opportunity to find out what the fuck was happening to me. Was I ever gonna get better? Was there any pathway home? I was terrified. I needed guidance, reassurance. I read my chart about a year later, and it said again and again, needy, and asks a lot of questions. And as I read it, I thought, how does one not do needy in this scenario? I'm making with every fiber of my being to hold my baby, to feed her, to smell her. Yes, I have 100 questions. This is my first time doing crazy. My only frame of reference is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I don't know if it's this peculiar state or any one of the 4 drugs I'm on today, but I'm having a hard time remembering anything or lining up ideas in a row. You see, Dr. Held had to know me and my state ever to deem me well enough to go home, but he had so many patients in a day, so many records to maintain, so much on his plate and in his mind that he'd blow in and blow out, and I felt as if I knew nothing more, and I worried that neither did he. So one day, when he came to visit, I said, Dr. Held, when you come to my room, even if it's just for 10 minutes, could you come in and sit down and take a breath and be here now with me and with my questions and my state? And he did. And he did every day for the rest of the time I was there. And I will always be so grateful for that. I remember the first time he used the word bipolar. My body jolted. He saw it, he said, hey, it's only bipolar. You can be really thankful that it's not borderline personality, schizophrenia, something much more difficult. I'd never really thought about being thankful for being bipolar. But then again, I'd never thought about being bipolar. He had this incredible ability to make bipolar disorder sound romantic. He talked about the hieroglyphics of existence. It's a direct quote. I wrote it down right next to cosmic poo. And the more I listened, I imagined that maybe being bipolar could be poetic, musical, an art form. Do you remember in the 4th grade when you wanted braces or a cast? Which meant you wanted fucked up teeth or a broken arm. I had moments in lockdown, I wanted poetic hieroglyphics. I'll never know of the layers of this experience, which were the sleep deprivation, the hormonal upheaval, or any one of the 9 drugs they tried. What I do know is after almost a month, Dr. Held deemed me well enough to go home. Diagnosis, bipolar, having experienced psychosis with mania. Medication, lithium and trilithon. And status stabilized. Now, Dr. Held, he even tried to soften the blow of lithium for me. He said, I understand you have some fears about the lithium, but think of it this way. It's an element. What could be more natural than that? Right, an element. I wasn't buying it. From the little I knew, which was very little, lithium had been around since the era of shock treatment. He said lithium, and I thought lobotomy in a pill. Now, he warned me when I went home. He said, if you want to stay out of here, you've got to sleep. Do you ever notice how God, you know, the source of all things, has this incredible sense of comedic timing? As I ponder this whole fiasco, I like to imagine God sitting up there saying, yeah, you see this part over here? Where she's fancying herself some kind of birthing goddess. We're just gonna throw her in the psych ward. You know, cultivate a little compassion, knock down her assumption meter a notch or two. Oh, and see this part right here where they tell her, like, if she goes home, she's got to sleep. If she doesn't sleep, she's going to land back in the psych ward. Yeah, day 2 home, we're going to sprinkle in some insomnia. Because what's life about if it's not about facing your fears, finding out what you're made of? Nothing like insomnia and daily anxiety attacks and a plethora of side effects from the lithium to help me figure out what I was made of. The worst of lithium's side effects for me was this complete emotional flattening. When it kicked in, I knew that I loved Adelaide, but I couldn't feel it. I couldn't feel anything. Now, I had been warned if I were to go off the lithium, I would land back in the psych ward and I would likely hurt Adelaide. This suggestion utterly stripped me of my sense of self. The me that I knew and had known for 40 years could never hurt her. For several days before I left the ward, there was a nurse that tried to convince me over a series of conversations to give up pumping. I had somehow continued to keep my milk in that entire time. And I thought at some point I would get home, at some point I'd get well, and I'd get off the meds, and I'd return her to the breast, and I'd feed her, and that would be my way of saying, I'm sorry. That'd be my way of telling her, your mama's here. I didn't leave. I didn't die. I'm here. But she suggested that if I got home and things got peculiar again, I might start feeding Adelaide lithium-enriched meals. I hated her for that suggestion. But I no longer knew what I was capable of. I stopped pumping the next day. To understand my sense of loss in this moment, I have to give you a little history about my relationship with my boobs. Let's start with the obvious. I got them. I didn't think you got boobs like this if you weren't going to feed your babies with them. I mean, if you had babies, right? If you decided to have babies. From about 13, I thought I'd been gifting hips for bearing them and boobies for feeding them. Around that time, my mom said to me, you see these, holding her own, you see these? You can thank me for these. I breastfed you and your brother for a good long time, and they didn't see a bra for most of the 60s. You're gonna breastfeed your babies and you'll never sag. That woman at 71 does not sag. I know, I don't know if she sold her soul or what she did. How'd that work out? I don't know. I mean, don't let me fool you. I'm wearing a push-up bra. Which really hurts my shoulders. That's some work for that poor bra. I got like a pound of mascara on, some lipstick. But my soul is Earth Mama all the way. I gave birth to Adelaide like generations had on the farm, at home. I was gonna feed Adelaide with my breast till she was like 12. Formula was not an option. I thought, if I feed her formula, how will she know I'm her mama? What if we don't bond? What if her brain develops all funny? Well, one day I look around at my life and most of what I see had never been an option. Give birth, go nuts. Stop feeding your baby. Stop sleeping with her. In fact, leave the building entirely. And while you're at it, take some meds to ensure you feel none of this. There were no breakout sessions, no videos and birth class for this shit. Day 2 home, in a fragile state, I went to see a psychiatrist I'd been assigned to upon release, Dr. Linsky. She started the visit by telling me that she hadn't really had time to review my case in any depth. And about 10 minutes in, when I said, is it possible that maybe I experienced postpartum psychosis with mania, but I'm not like forever bipolar? She said without any explanation that that was impossible and that I was beyond all doubt bipolar. Now that statement, in combination with the fact that she talked to me like I was a 5-year-old manipulative child, led to a really easy decision. We broke up. So I go home, I've dumped my shrink, but I have no plan B. I can't sleep, I can barely function, and I want to help take care of Adelaide. Breathe, Mela, breathe. As the oxygen hit my brain, I thought, wait a minute, I know who I am. I'm not bipolar. I have never experienced depression. I've never experienced anxiety, not had a blip in my mental health. I gave birth at 40. I haven't slept for a month. There's got to be another answer. So with Adelaide asleep in my arms with a tummy full of formula, I continued researching perinatal mood anxiety disorders online, and I called in my team. I had a series of conversations with my Aunt Dorothy, who was a psych nurse for 40 years, and her trusted colleague, a psychiatrist. It was their opinion that, given my behavior and communication through the experience at the time, my age, lack of symptomatic history, that I had experienced psychosis with mania, but was not forever bipolar. I asked my dad, I said, Pops, do you think I'm bipolar? And he said, Mel, to be honest, I don't know what that means. He said, I'll tell you something I do know. We're all a little crazy. And he meant we all, not just my family. My mama, she was about as enamored with the idea of me being on lithium as I was. In fact, when she found out how many drugs they had me on, I was half surprised she did not blow up the building. Eric kept telling me at every turn, every time I'd ask, he'd say, babe, you know, that strong, hard-headed, wise, self-knowing woman I fell in love with, she's in there. And whatever you gotta do to get back to her, I got you. My midwife introduced me to Dr. Christine White. Now this woman should have a Jesus complex. Complex hormone panels looking at my neurotransmitters, hormones, revealed critically low levels of progesterone, estrogen, serotonin, melatonin, dopamine. She looked at the results and she said, I have no idea how you're functioning. You shouldn't have been able to get out of bed today, dress yourself, drive yourself here. Apparently, my testosterone and adrenaline were through the roof and my cortisol was spiking at night. She said, this might feel something like you have this heightened ability to see, smell, hear the tiger in the jungle. But you have none of the hormones to help you figure out what to do about the fact that you just saw a fucking tiger. It took about a month. of nutrients and herbs and major sleep aid and bioidentical hormones, and the insomnia and anxiety faded to nothing. And only the detachment remained. In the face of uncertainty, I got really quiet. I took many deep breaths. I was terrified. But my answer was clear. I didn't have it in me to raise Adelaide not feeling love for her. I went off the lithium. That was over 5 years ago, and I have not had a repeat symptom since. Was I right? Was it postpartum psychosis with mania, and my only chance of another episode is if I have another baby? Maybe. Could I be wrong? Could I be bipolar and there are episodes to come? Maybe. A year out of the ward, I went to see Dr. Ayers, who actually asked me to use her real name recently, Dr. Davison. And I want to be clear, I went to see her for 2 reasons. I was really hoping she'd get out her giant eraser and erase the word bipolar from the record of my life. I also wanted to just share my experience with her. I thought maybe the team could learn something about having mamas with little babies and the inpatient unit. You know, maybe they would think about hormone panels or look at some of the best emerging practices in the field, like in some cases, when appropriate, 3 days of sleep aid only, see where a mama lands. And a real approach to mama-baby bonding, one that recognizes that that separation alone would be enough to make almost any mama crazy. And that there had to be a way to nurture that bond while a mama is being kept safe in the psych ward. She was phenomenal. She listened, she asked great questions, and she said a bunch of things that stuck with me, and I'll share one. I'll share a couple. She said, you know, there are those in the field of psychiatry that pathologize a vast swath of the human experience. She said, for me, I'm really interested in functionality. Are you functioning? She said, after these 2 long visits, there's no part of me that's afraid for you and thinks I need to convince you to go back on the lithium. She said, now, if I'd been your psychiatrist when you went off the lithium, I would have been terrified for you, and I really would have tried to convince you not to go off it that early. She said, but you know, at this point, I'm really glad you found the path you did and that it's working and that you're functioning. She never used the words bipolar or psychosis. She didn't pull out that giant satisfying eraser. She said, there's no telling. For a long time, as I shared this story, which I will say, looking back now, that long time was the first year, I would share a layer of this piece about a bipolar misdiagnosis. Finding my way back to stasis in the midst of a misdiagnosis might be a part of my story, but the truth is, it's too soon to tell. I'll tell you what, I have a safety plan for menopause. As time has gone on and the experience settles in my bones, I'm more at ease with the gray area and that which can't be known. And from day 1 out of the psych ward, I have prioritized sleep. Sleep is golden in my life. It's pretty pathetic. It reigns over nearly every other activity. Sleep trumps cleaning, exercise, meditation, quality time with the family, sexy time with the husband. Usually if he's here, I apologize at this point. I realized how deeply I'd come to integrate the possibility that I might be bipolar when I was writing this show. I'd stay up late, like 2 a.m. late, several nights in a row, writing, and at some point I'd think, don't fucking let yourself get sleep deprived. And then I'd think, wouldn't it be ironic if I landed on stage in a full-blown manic episode, telling you a story about a bipolar misdiagnosis? Shortly after that thought, I would go to sleep and nap the next day, and I spread my late nights out. You know, I absolutely rejected that diagnosis when I went off the lithium. I was so afraid, I felt like I had to. And my heart and gut still say, I'm not bipolar, I'm Melabangs. Medicate that. But in the realm of possibilities, I might be. And if I am, life will show me that. You know, every once in a while, life just kicks your ass. And we've all been there, right? It's the human journey. We've all had postpartum psychosis. You might call yours cancer, death of a loved one, divorce, assault. I found for me, in this experience, at some point, I just surrendered. And I just took it 1 minute at a time, moment to moment. I'd try to find this way to just show up and keep breathing and find my truth, and little by little, the strength to act on that truth. Stripped of everything I knew to be true about myself and the world around me, I experienced this connection to all things. And on the other side of this cosmic ass kicking, I am more present, more compassionate, more at ease with the gray area. I'm not saying I don't have work. I have work. But there's a noticeable difference. This isn't a clean story. There's no black and white, no good and bad, and no one to blame. Not Dr. Held, not lithium, not my family for putting me in the psych ward, not my mama for wanting to bust me out, not my pops for wanting to see me in there until he recognized me. And not me for getting knocked up at 40. Not me for failing to sleep in that first month. And not me for asking Eric to throw Adelaide to me through the wall. You know, in the midst of that little naked performance art piece, I said, baby, I love it. Leave it to the Brooklyn sickos. Laughing at this piece. I love that. I said, baby, throw it to me through the wall. It's not there. Can I have another moment with 17-year-old Adelaide? Had a baby? I'm so sorry for that moment. If you had been in my arms, would I have thrown you? I want to say no. But the truth is, I don't know. I was certain that that wall was not there, that it was just a figment of our collective imaginations. I know you'll forgive me. I can hear you now, your 2.5-year-old you saying, Mama, here's the deal. There's yes and there's no. Let's talk about yes. Oh, baby girl, you brought so much yes into my life, and I just want you to know that this is the moment that Mama forgives me. I forgive me. Right here, right now, with all of you. Why? Why here? Why now? Well, I'll tell you what, if I knew this moment was coming, I would have not booked the first theater. I booked a theater. I gave myself 4 months to write, produce, audience, build, tech, everything for the show. I thought it'll be easy. I've told my story in the paper, the radio. I've told my story 100 times. I'll add some funny. I'll add some sad. I'll cry and laugh. You'll cry and laugh. We'll heal. It'll be great. It'll be kumbaya. But I got towards the end of the story, and I kept thinking, it's not all here. It's not this clean. It's not this easy. I live with incredible unknowns. At the time I was writing the show, although I had shared my story with many, many people, I had never said to anyone, well, in some cases, not even to myself, I might be bipolar. I had not said, I'm thankful for the psych ward for keeping me safe and keeping Adelaide safe and ensuring that neither one of us died. I had never said, I'm thankful to lithium for bringing me back to planet Earth. I had never said, I asked my husband to throw our baby to me through a wall. How do you say that? Even to yourself, let alone someone else. But then I remembered, this is a story about slim chances. It's a story about things they don't teach you in birth class. It's about women I had never met, with whom I share experiences I had never heard stories about. 2.9% of mamas experience a bipolar episode postpartum, some of them having had an episode prior, some not. 0.01% experience postpartum psychosis. Of that 1 in 1,000, 5% have killed themselves. 4% have killed one or more of their children. And while the vast majority of women that experience a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder never hurt a soul, there are thousands and thousands of women who have lost custody of their children, lost their marriages, and many, many more who live with shame and regret to this day for foreign, invasive, dark thoughts that passed through them in a time that was supposed to be nothing but love. And I thought, if I'm telling my story so that 1 of you, 10 of you, 100 of you might find the ability to take what you've shoved in the deep recesses of yourself and pull them into the light, don't I have to take those last few remnants that I have hidden in my dark corners and bring them to the light of this stage? Asking Eric to throw Adelaide to me through the wall was not the only dark moment. There were several. I remember I saw myself as this beautiful Black Panther, and Adelaide was my cub, and I'd nuzzle her and love on her like any good Black Panther mama would. And then suddenly there'd be this flash, and I'd see myself devour her. Where do thoughts like that come from? I don't want to eat her. I don't know. I don't know where thoughts like that come from, but I'll tell you 2 things I do know. Intrusive, disturbing thoughts postpartum are incredibly common, much more so than psychosis and bipolar. The other thing I know is thoughts like that thought passed through me. It is not of me. It did not define in that moment or any moment since the love that I am, the love that I carry for Adelaide. You know, the messiest truth in all of this is if I would have thrown her, it would have been an act of love. Can you wrap your hearts and minds around that? Because I'm still trying. And whether this happened to you or someone you know and love, whether it happened 30 years ago, 3 years ago, or has yet to come, I want to be a woman you've met. And I want this to be a story you've heard. And if you're drowning in shame or crippled by fear, I say, breathe, mama, breathe. The past is done. You are forgiven. There is only now. And you are love. And if this is happening to a mama you know and love, then take her in your arms or by the hand and tell her my story. And you tell her that in every given moment, there's only ever one choice. Fear or love, baby. Fear or love. And you tell her that Mela Bangs and my huge, potentially bipolar vagina, we choose love.
Wonderful, Melissa. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Stephanie.
How really amazing, how poignant, Fact-filled, how important, how emotional. What a story. You
Thank
put
you.
it all together.
I did. I did.
Were you a performer before this? What gave you all these skills to put this together so well?
You know, it's wild. I did a little bit of theater as a kid in high school and a little bit in college, but really not much. And I had throughout my life, like I worked in human rights in El Salvador. I did work in the labor movement. I was a nonprofit consultant for 11 years, and I did do lots of storytelling. But in general, and I was often moving money towards really good work through storytelling, but it was often not my story, right? But I did, while I lived in New York City, when I first started my consulting business, on a double dog dare for my mom, I signed up for classes at the Upright Citizens Brigade in 2001. And that was one of the scariest and most thrilling things I ever did. And I took classes there the entire time I lived in New York. And I had no idea that years later, I would take everything I learned from improv and comedy and use them to tell a story of my own to hopefully help women and men and families carrying experiences like this, help them heal.
Well, really, I mean, everyone has to see this. How are you getting it out there so people can see this?
Well, I haven't done a whole lot of it in COVID, and I did have shows that were live shows that were canceled due to COVID. But in the first year, we toured it all over Montana. Then we did a GoFundMe and we toured it for a year up and down the West Coast. I brought it to the Rattlestick in New York, and I met you at APAP, right?
Right.
And it's so wild. I mean, I've continued to share it. I share it at medical conferences across the country, and we've kind of been all over with it. But it really did go on pause, or it slowed down a lot. Shortly after I met you, Stephanie, you may remember that my mom was diagnosed with cancer, and I had a 10-month goodbye with her. She lived for 10 months after her diagnosis, and I lost her almost 2 years ago. And so really in the last year, I've been writing a new show and a book also.
About the same, about your mom's death from cancer?
Yeah, about grief and about motherhood and it's really a love letter to her. And it's as much about our love and our journey together as it also is about motherhood and forgiveness and loss and grief. And I will say, kind of parallel to that, I have, though, continued with lots and lots of work in the maternal mental health field while continuing to share my story. I did, for the last 5 years, I've done workshops for moms, storytelling workshops for moms with an experience of loss or trauma in the perinatal period. And I had this incredible opportunity to work for Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies of Montana and be their maternal mental health advocate and co-found a statewide conference. And we had an incredible conference, the third one last week, 5-day conference, virtual conference. And it was the best yet. It was incredible. We had over 260 providers from California, Washington, and Montana, providers that walk with moms and families in this vulnerable period, come and get real in-depth education, because one of the problems in 2012 when I gave birth was so many of the medical professionals in the field don't come out of med school or don't come out of their formal training with much training in maternal mental health. And that is a part of the problem that I really hope to tackle with my story and with a bunch of parallel projects that I've done.
Sounds so needed. When you were in the hospital, did you feel that any of the people had any special training for maternal health?
No. No. But that is changing. And I will say that's a challenge internationally. It's a challenge nationally. Montana, we're 10, 15, 20 years behind Washington, California, and even further behind cities like Detroit that started some of this work many decades ago. But it is a change, that field is rapidly changing. And I had the pleasure of sitting on the advisory council for Postpartum Support International, and many thanks to David, who's putting links up as I talk. I really appreciate it. What I was going to say about that, I was going to say that, I sat on the advisory council for Postpartum Support International, and they're the leading NGO that trains medical providers, ranging from the OB to the pediatrician to the mental health professional to the home visiting nurse or the WIC, the WIC social worker in perinatal mental health. So they're better equipped to walk with moms that are experiencing depression, anxiety, OCD, you name it.
Yeah, it sounds like it's pretty important. It sounds like it's so much of what happens in science and research that gets diverted from women into what we all are, men.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
that of course is a joke, but you know what I'm saying. It's like,
I do. Yes.
It's so hard to get research money for women's ailments for some reason.
It is. Absolutely, but it is really cool to, I partner with an organization, Maternal Mental Health Now in LA, and the California Healthcare Foundation recently has funded me to do a train the trainer of this storytelling workshop that I do so that survivor advocates can lead this workshop in their community. And also it's really a collaborative process where the cohorts, the leaders that are coming, will bring in their own community perspective and stories and beliefs and tales and traditions to really make the workshop their own. But I had always hoped that this story would both touch people on an individual level, that would help sort of peel back layers of shame and silence for women and men and families that had a mental health crisis postpartum or around birth, and that it would also shift perspectives in individual providers and entire hospital systems. And that is happening, and that has been happening. It's credible to get to be a part of that change. And play a small role in really big change that's happened and been happening in our state and across the country. And I love that I get to do it with art and with comedy and with storytelling. It's felt like I won the jackpot when it all came together.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody, I was coaching somebody in storytelling for a contest. And one of the things, he was a principal or a superintendent of schools in Oakland or something like that. And he was saying, after every workshop I've gone to on diversity training and all that, the only thing that really sits and stays is storytelling. Yes. So you're doing, I think if that is indeed true, you are doing us all such a great, it's so beneficial to have that, to have what you've done. And to do it in this form, which luckily works quite well during these times of COVID.
It really does. I mean, thank you so much for creating and maintaining this beautiful platform. I mean, what a gift. None of us could be doing this work without you and your vision and creating a space for our stories and our shows and our art. And I'm just so grateful to you for that and all the years you've done this work. And I know when we first met, we imagined I would come live and actually get to do it in your theater. And I hope that at some point I do get to come post-COVID, bring my whole body to your space, and whether it's this show or the next show. But I did, getting ready for this and thinking about this, and I didn't really get to do it live this time, but I thought, wow, I loved looking at all the shows that you're hosting around and thinking, oh, I could do a show from my bedroom. How wild is that?
Right.
It's so cool.
You could do it upside down, hanging from a swing set. You could do it anywhere.
My lighting, you wouldn't even know. Like, have I folded the pile of laundry behind me? Have I not? Am I wearing pants? What do I smell like? You won't know any of it.
Yes. And I want to just mention anybody who's in our audience tonight, if you have a question for Melissa, please put it in the chat. I see Nikki has written about you sharing this. On behalf of all the mothers, past, present, and future, you are saving lives, I'm sure, from a mother whose daughter also went through horrific postpartum depression.
Thank you, Nikki. And I'm so sorry to hear that for your daughter too. Thank you.
Yes. And do you oh, there's a postpartum doula watching.
Postpartum doulas wear capes. They're superheroines in my mind. It should be in the Human Rights Declaration. All parents should have a postpartum doula.
I know that you were on our Solo Arts Heal on Wednesday before doing the show. I just saw a segment of it, and I'm so glad I got to see the whole thing finally, because I'd seen segment before and the segment now. But it's wonderful to see your segments, but it's so much more wonderful to see the whole show. And do you think in your case, you talked a little bit about this, you know, like there were maybe perhaps some reasons in your past that you might have been more apt to get psychotic after birth. And I don't know if you want to, you know, talk about that.
Like some sort of the risk factors that might make some of the risk factors. So yeah, I mean, definitely age can be a factor. Absolutely. I do know that sleep deprivation was a major piece for me. The fact that, you know, I couldn't, you know, all moms are hypervigilant postpartum. Most, I would say, it is normal to be hypervigilant postpartum, but my hormonal upheaval was tweaked just enough that my hypervigilance was exaggerated, so I could not sleep, and it just built to the point where even when I had an opportunity to sleep, an opportunity to nap, even if Eric took her and there was time, I could not, right? And it kept accumulating. It's quite possible, and it is a risk factor, that the fact that my mom hit perimenopause at 42 and I was giving birth at 40 had something to do with how hypervigilant I was, and the fact that I couldn't sleep, and that sleep deprivation led to a psychotic break. The other piece is, you know, there are so many risk factors. You know, a history of trauma is a risk factor. If there's bipolar in your family, it's a risk factor. If you've ever had a psychotic break, it's a risk factor. There are a lot of risk factors that exist that I didn't have, but I did absolutely have trauma in my personal history, and I did experience trauma as a little kid and was a survivor of sexual abuse. And they do say that that is one of the, you know, whether it's sexual trauma or physical trauma or even verbal trauma, that can be a precursor. It doesn't mean that you will have a psychotic break, but there is a correlation, right, in the likelihood. You know, and wildly, I actually, and I don't know if you saw this, Stephanie, in one of the questions that I answered the other evening, but I did actually have some healing around the sexual trauma stuff, both while psychotic and also in my healing journey after the psych ward. And so it's just so interesting the way the human brain works, that it will protect you from something for so long. But then when I was in the psych ward, psychotic, living in this, there were periods of time, days, where I was in this grace-filled state and surrounded by these loving voices. And for the first time in my life, I actually saw who it was when it happened, like a whole movie that I had never remembered, but had these loving voices holding me as I saw it, saying, "You were only a child, this was not your fault. There is only now, you are love," and healing me through seeing it. I do see a question from Stacy. Hi, Stacy. Stacy's a friend of mine. This is our first time seeing this ever. Thanks so much for being here. You ask, can I share my menopause plan? So, you know, it's so interesting because whether you experience postpartum depression, anxiety, OCD, PTSD, bipolar, psychosis, one of the reasons that it can happen in birth, you know, right around birth, it can happen pregnant, can happen postpartum, is because it is such a tumultuous hormonal time. Well, menopause is that next tumultuous hormonal time. And so if you're someone that really struggled postpartum, it is likely, not for sure, but it is likely you will also struggle in some way during menopause. And so I'm in perimenopause now, and it continues like to like rapidly shift and change. And I remember my mom in these years being like, I just passed a blood clot the size of a mouse. And, you know, and that's now happening. I'm like, oh my God, she wasn't kidding. Holy moly. And, you know, but what I'm doing is I come into this period knowing that my mom really struggled emotionally in menopause. It was a very tumultuous and iffy time for her, menopause was. I do protect sleep. That's a big one. I do take all of my vitamins. I'm on herbal remedies that balance my hormones and neurotransmitters. Dr. Christine White, who I talk about in my story, who really did save my life. She tests my hormones and my neurotransmitters periodically and keeps me balanced as I'm coming into menopause. In some cases, I'll actually do bioidentical hormones. In other cases, I'm actually doing things like 3 tablespoons of ground flaxseed, which stimulates my body producing its own progesterone in certain times of the month. But I really have her look at what is my snowflake doing hormonally and in terms of neurotransmitters, not blanket answers for anyone coming into menopause, but for me. I also think, you know, it's like nutrition and exercise, and also I really watch stress in my life. Stress is a key piece that I have to really stay on top of if I want smooth sailing. And I will say, and I'll just share this and hand it back to you, Stephanie, that I did have a moment after my mom passed. It was the first Mother's Day without her. I had produced a show of 7 other storytellers called Momedy. It was their stories, their birth stories, 7 moms and a dad. I had lost a lot of sleep. I'd been protecting sleep ever since that first break, but coming up for this huge theater, like a 400-seat house and this show, I just got a little sleep deprived and I was in grief first Mother's Day. And I remember the day that the world just got a little more beautiful, and I stepped out of the car and looked at the rainbow in the sky and it raining, and I started crying because it was so beautiful. And I went to the grocery store and the vegetables were all just so beautiful, as if they were singing to me. And I talked to the produce man, and I'm an artist and an intuitive and a lover of life and human beings anyway, but it was just turned up a notch, where I found the produce man to be the most compelling, beautiful human being I'd ever met. And I was going back to that state, right? And so I called my husband from the produce aisle and I said, babe, I think it's happening again. And he said, call Dr. White. And I called her. I was still at the grocery store and she said, come. And I, that day, went home with a bag of remedies, all, you know, for hormones and neurotransmitters, and like 5 of them for sleep. And I think 4 of them natural and 1 serious one. And got to sleeping that night, got 7 hours that night, 11 the next. And I am certain staved off a second psychotic break by having that relationship with her and that awareness.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that wonderful when life teaches you something and you can catch it?
Yeah, it is.
Potential, whether it's going to happen or not, you capture the potential and you do whatever you can to not let it happen again, right? That's all you can do.
Absolutely.
I mean, because when you talk about sleep deprivation, I know I've read some stuff about older people that, you know, when they get dementia and crazed and all that stuff, a lot of it, how much of it is based on the fact that whatever their chemical systems are not allowing them proper sleep anymore is encouraging that kind of behavior.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, well, this is wonderful, and I'm so glad to get to talk to you, and I can't wait to see you on our live stage at the Marsh, and also we could even do something with your next show before it's getting it ready.
Yeah, maybe excerpts or something. Oh, that'd be so fun. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Stephanie. I'm just so grateful for you and this beautiful space you create for so many voices. And many thanks to everyone who came tonight and leaned in.
Thank you. And we are grateful for you for doing it from all the way from Montana.
Of all places.
Is it an hour later?
Hour later. It's an hour later. I will say I live in a blue dot in a red sea. Missoula is like a mini San Francisco.
Well, that is good to hear. We'll have to come visit.
Yes, you will.
Thank you so much. And please consider making a tip to our donation tip jar or become a member. You will be supporting the Marsh and our wonderful artist here. And as I said, we are doubled with a match tonight. So come see our shows. Come next week to see Ian's shows. I'm sure you will love Marga Gomez. Marga Gomez is not getting any younger, and Lori Holtz. Who Killed Sylvia Plath? So thank you, and I hope to see everybody here soon, and I hope to see you too, Melissa, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
And onward ho! Bye!
Bye.